The Archangel Chronicles by Raymond Collodi. Copyright 2023, all rights reserved. Chapter 25, The Kurgan. Axia was brought back to her pavilion. She was surrounded by her priestesses, kneeling round her bed day and night, with burning incense and chanting incessantly. I carefully examined the wound on her thigh. It was draining pus and blood and was developing a serious infection. I was greatly concerned about that infection spreading to the rest of her leg or turning septic, leading to septicemia, blood poisoning. She already had some of these symptoms: fevers, chills, breathing fast and shallow, rapid heart rate. She was lethargic and faded in and out of consciousness. I had my medical bag of tricks brought to me. I had ample supplies of propolis and some oil of myrtle, both of which had antibiotic properties. I had also brought a supply of turmeric with me from Alexandria. I went to work as best I could. I cleansed the wound. I retrieved a supply of maggots from the camp, which had been careful to feed and tend for this very purpose. I applied a few of them to the reopened wound, and they began to do their magic, consuming damaged and dead tissue, and begin the healing process. I administered a tincture of turmeric oil and myrtle, which made a formidable anti-inflammatory dressing with analgesic properties. Then I could do nothing else but sit back and wait and hope for Axia's fever to break and for her to regain her strength. Day and night we waited. Arsalion never left Axia's side, sleeping nearby in fits and starts, and directing the priestesses and servants. Axia faded in and out of consciousness, alternating between burning fever and bouts of intense shivering. She was strong and would rally for a period of time, long enough to surface back into lucid consciousness. My treatments were helping, but without the kinds of advanced antibiotics that were available to me in my modern time, it was a losing battle, and I began to feel helpless to stem the tide. After a week or so, her condition plateaued to the point where she was stable enough to sit propped up in bed and give commands and administer to her people. One morning she awoke and summoned her brothers, Theron, Abu, now known as Targetus, Master of the Eagles, Scarus, and I to her bedside. She commanded her servants to bring her outside the pavilion to an elevated platform which was on a hill that overlooked the Scythian camp. She looked out over the vast warren of covered wagons, tents, yurts, and wooden structures forming the large temporary city that the Massagetae and their allies had assembled on the fertile plain beside the river Oxus. Axia was very pale, but clear-eyed and alert. She gestured to me, and I went to her side and knelt. She placed her hand on my shoulder. Arsalion, looking spent from lack of sleep, stood beside her bed, his eyes teary. "Adam the Wise, my shaman," she said, "you have brought me through curtains of fire and darkness more than once. But this time, my lord, I do not feel that even your skill and knowledge will save me from the beckoning shadows." "My Vasilisa," I said, "do not lose hope. You are strong and young. Do not look into the abyss. Look to the light. Your people need you. You have won a great victory and united your people. You must not leave them." She looked to her brothers, Scumaxa and Protothesis. "'Tis true," she said, "though I shall not leave them just yet. I fear my time is short. There are things that must be done while we have the strength to do them. Brother Protothesis, have we avenged our father? What word is there of our treacherous uncle Artaxes and his ally?" Protothesis turned and gestured to an attendant, who brought forward 2 wooden boxes. Bowing, he set them down at the foot of Axia's bed. He opened the boxes and pulled out 2 objects which he held, one in each hand, high above his head so that all could see. "Here, Sister Queen, is the fruit of your victory. Here are the skulls of our traitors Artaxes and his ally Orestes. While you have rested, we have made them into drinking vessels for the great victory feast." The skulls he held up had been cleansed of all blood and gore, and were polished white bone. They were inverted, the jaws had been removed, and the interior had been lined with a golden vessel, the brim of which gleamed in the morning light. "Long have I dreamt of this, brother prince," said Axia, "yet I fear that the fates will not have me sip victory wine from these cups. I hear the whisper of the gods of the underworld calling me to their banquet." Scumaxa stepped forward. "No, Sister Queen, you must not go there. Our father King Bartatua must be interred into his place of glory. A kurgan must be built upon this place, so that his spirit may have rest on these plains." Axia closed her eyes and fell back upon her pillows, a deep sigh passing her lips. "Yes, brother prince, you are right. This last task must be completed before we can rest. Summon the heralds and the priestesses." When the heralds, priestesses, and all the commanders of the Massagetae host were assembled before the queen, reclining on her bed, she asked for her sword. Arsalion came forth and handed it to her, hilt first. Axia did not have the strength to lift it. Arsalion knelt beside her, and taking her hand, placed it on the hilt. He helped her hold it aloft. The assembly bowed. Axia, summoning all of her strength, cried out her command so that all could hear. "Heralds, go forth from here with the priestesses to all of the people, and give these commands from she who is worthy of armor, daughter of Bartatua, your great king. He must have his tomb, a great barrow, a kurgan. It shall be built upon this place. Go out to the woods and cut down larch trees to make the roof of his tomb. Prepare all of our fallen warriors, dress their bodies with sweet grasses and herbs, so that they may also take a place of honor with their great king. Let the people go out far and wide upon the steppes to cut turf and raise a great mound on this sacred ground. Let the warriors select 50 of the swiftest horses and prepare them to accompany the spirit of Bartatua and his warriors into the next world. Let the treasures of our nation, all the gold and precious things that we carry, be brought to this place to honor them and ease their passage from this life into the next. And tell my people to prepare a place at my father's feet for me, for I will join him in this place of peace, as my days are numbered. Let this be done." Arsalion cried out in anguish, "No, my Vasilisa, you must not go there." The sword, held in Axia's hand, but held up by Arsalion, fell and clattered to the floor. Arsalion leapt and draped himself across Axia's knees, burying his face among the silken coverings, sobbing. Axia reached out and stroked his hair. "My love," she said, "the gods are cruel to us. They give us bitter tears at the hour of our triumph. But we must accept our fate. Know that I have loved you. Happily I would have been to take you as my king." Arsalion looked up, tears streaming down his handsome face, now racked in grief and sorrow. "My love, my queen, you shall not leave me. If you go into the great Kurgan at the foot of your father, there I shall go also. I cannot stay in this world without you." The burial was to be in 40 days. Within that time, the camp and place of burial was utterly transformed by the work of thousands upon thousands of the people, who were organized into many groups, each with different tasks. A shaft was dug in the middle of a large circle, about 300 meters in diameter, cut into the turf of the steppe. A stone wall made with slabs of stone was built along the circumference. A ramp was excavated down to the bottom of the shaft. Large oak timbers were fashioned from trees cut from the nearby forest, and over 6,000 larch trees were cut from far and wide and brought to the site. Vertical oak timbers were set in the corners of the shaft, and other timbers lined the sides, projecting well above the ground level. Behind these walls, the pits were lined with horizontal boards and posts set upright, embedded in the stone. A roof was made of horizontal sloping timbers with beams meeting at the apex. This formed a chamber from which was entered by means of the sloping ramp, which was lined with timbers and partly roofed. The walls of the ramp were lined with stone and plastered inside. This is where the king's body would be laid. In other compartments, sacrificed carcasses of wild boar, stags, antelope, and other game, and birds of all kinds were carefully arranged, as if at a banquet, all facing inwards towards the king's burial chamber. Bartatua's body was taken from the sarcophagus in which it had been transported. It had been carefully preserved years before. The warriors slain in the battle were now brought forth. Their bodies were carefully washed. They were meticulously prepared by covering them with wax. Their stomachs were cut open and cleaned out, and the body cavities filled with chopped sweet grasses, incense, celery seed, and anise. They were sewn up again. Honey and salt were used as preservatives. Their skulls were filled with horsehair, pine needles, and pine cones. Muscle tissue had been removed through slits, and the bodies made up with packing materials. The king was laid out on a wagon, the slain warriors also on other wagons, and they were carted around all through the camp to the various clans and tribes in succession. Each group received them and entertained themselves with a feast at which the dead king and his warriors were served a portion of all that was set before the others. This was done for 40 days, at which time the burial was to take place. Felt tents were set up all around the mound. Fires were lit inside the tents, and warriors and folk of all kind went into them to throw seeds upon the fire and breathe in the vapors that filled the tent interiors. Many of the people were thrown into fits of ecstasy and delirium. In their rapture, some of them cut off parts of their ears, shaved their long hair, cut themselves around their arms, slashed their foreheads and noses, and pierced their left hands with arrows. These acts of ritual mutilation were both a public demonstration of the depth of their collective grief at the loss of their king and fear of the loss of their queen as well. The royal treasury was opened, and many trunks full of gold and precious objects, made with the finest craftsmanship, the wealth of the nation, much of it brought here from Rome and Alexandria for Axia by Theron, were emptied and piled onto the ox carts. These treasure carts followed the king and his body in procession through the camp, accompanied by singing horns and flutes and the beatings of drums. Many of the people went into their houses as the king and the treasure wagons processed through their clans, tribes, or parts of the camp along the roads, and they heaped their own objects of gold, weapons, armor, and other precious works of art onto the carts with the royal treasury. A new sarcophagus of stone slabs was brought to the burial chamber and placed at the center. Bodies of 24 of the most prominent slain warriors of renown were brought forth and laid on the stone platforms, radiating around the sarcophagus like rays from a rising sun. Other slain warriors were arrayed in compartments outside the main burial chamber, again in a radiating pattern. Day by day, timbers were placed over the compartments, and turf placed carefully over the timbers until the mound began to rise over 100 meters from the ground at its apex. At last, the time had come to inter the king in his chamber, and now, day and night, the entire nation waited to see if she who is worthy of armor, Axia Panoplides, would join her father in the burial chamber. All of my efforts, with all the meager skill and means at my disposal, were not able to halt the march of the infection that was consuming the queen. She slipped into unconsciousness. All through the camp, fires were lit. The Massagetae nation wailed and moaned. Drums were beat in slow requiem. Priestesses tore their gowns and covered themselves with ashes. Axia would not survive the night. The nation would lose its warrior queen. She would slip into the realm of myth and song to be recited around campfires to keep fear and night at bay. I had been at Axia's side through all of this, feeling helpless as I watched her life ebb away, hour by hour. Arsalion never left her. He knelt at her bed, head and face buried in the silken coverings, sobbing. Targetus, my former apprentice Abu, now master of the eagles, came to me in the dim light of the pavilion. He took my arm and led me gently away from the death vigil. I stepped out with him from Axia's pavilion, set on a hill overlooking the vast Massagetae camp. It was a dark night. The sky and stars were shrouded with black clouds, blocking any light. The only light came from thousands of campfires which twinkled in the distance, defying the darkness. Many of the people were standing, facing the pavilion on all sides. The whole nation seemed to be holding its collective breath. "Kyrios," whispered Targetus, "someone is coming. I hear the name Michael and Gabriel in my head. And look there." He pointed towards the western sky. "What is that?" Far to the west, close to the horizon, I saw a pinpoint of light in the sky. As I watched, the light grew and took shape. It was a mysterious blue light which began to blaze brighter and brighter, penetrating the dark sky like a stiletto. I began to discern a pillar of light which throbbed like a blinding white-hot fire, sometimes like water, quicksilver and flowing, sometimes a swirling rush of flame, and then like waterfalls, soaring and flying like molten birds on a wing, and then settling down into a shimmering, pulsating brightness. And at the center of the pulsating brightness, I saw the glowing face of Gabriel, as if from a distance. Theron and Scaris had climbed the hill and now joined us, out of breath. Theron was cursing as he stepped up onto the platform overlooking the camp. "By Zeus," he said, "we stumbled in this wretched darkness, and I ripped my tunic on the way up. Can't see anything in this cursed darkness." He stopped and looked at us as we stood in rapt attention, staring at the apparition in the western sky. "What are you staring at?" he said as he turned his head to where Targetus was pointing. "Can you not see it, Theron?" "What about you, Scaris?" said Targetus. "See what, me boy?" said Scaris as he joined us, out of breath. "They be nothing more than darkness to where you be pointing." Targetus looked to me, his face full of wonder. "Kyrios, what does this mean?" I thought long and hard. A biblical verse from the beginning of the Gospel of John popped into my mind, something that I had read and remembered from a long time ago. I heard myself saying it, as if from a distance. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God, and all things were made by him, and without him was not anything that was made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. And the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not." Theron, Scaris, and Targetus now all turned and stared at me. I could feel them looking at me uneasily. "My dear friends, can you not see it? He has come to announce the great event. You will all be part of the story." I turned to Targetus. "My dear apprentice, you can see it. Tell them." Abu Targetus turned to Scaris and Theron, who were looking at him mystified. "My brothers and fellow travelers, all I know is that someone named Michael and someone named Gabriel has something to do with this light that you can't see. But I see it." Targetus looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "Kyrios, are these the messengers? Tell us. You have seen them before. I know this." Scaris shook his head and said, "Hae ye all gone mad? I canna see nothing but a dark night." He cocked his head as if he were hearing something. "But what is that sound?" Theron came beside him. "I hear it too. What is it?" What we all heard was the merest hint of a chorus of music, sweet, but with no discernible melody or words or shape. But as we listened, and I saw the light getting stronger, the unmistakable sound of a choir of a multitude of voices began to fill our heads. I was not sure we were actually hearing it, or feeling it. The voices, sweeter than anything I have ever heard or experienced, swelled within us and pierced our souls and seemed to fill us with light. Unmistakably, I heard the words take shape. Holy, holy, holy. The four of us were struck dumb, and we stood for the longest time, transfixed. Gabriel was summoning me with luminous words that filled my consciousness. He told me that it was time for us to leave this place, and not just me, but all of us. But who is us, and how can we leave? I heard myself saying. And how do we come? By what means, over what vast distances would you have us travel? The light faded ever so slowly, and the utter darkness descended again. The sweet sound of the chorus faded until it could be heard no more. The silence, profound and oppressive, engulfed all of us. The sense of utter despair seized us, and we could not speak, nor could we even see each other. Then sharp-eyed Targetus shouted out to us, "Kyrios, look, there, beyond the camp. Light! I see another light." This light was different. It was a familiar light, an earthly light, a light cast by a burning torch or lamp. It was small in the distance, but it defied the darkness. The torch was moving rapidly along the plain and entered the edge of the camp. As the flaming torch passed by each tent and wagon, the Scythians awoke and peered out of their dwellings. A crowd, growing ever larger, was following the torchlight as it wound its way through the crooked streets of the temporary city, passing by tents, yurts, covered wagons, and wooden buildings in the camp. Horns began to blow, and drums began to beat, as the whole vast multitude awoke, and the crowd following the torch swelled every moment. Now I saw the torch at the bottom of the hill, and rapidly it came, carried by an unseen arm, mounting the hill up to the pavilion. The people stopped at the bottom of the hill, and all eyes were upon us. The torch arrived, and no one could see who was carrying it. But I could. The gray hooded figure passed the torch to me, and I held it high. It was Raphael of the Gray Eyes. My friend and guide, words cannot express my gratitude that you have come in our hour of need, I said. Targetus stood beside me, and he bowed, and then knelt on one knee before Raphael. Targetus, master of the eagles, it is time for you to join our quest, he said. I understand, was all that Targetus could say, as he bowed deeply. I am ready. I became aware that Theron and Scarus had fallen to the ground and covered their heads in terror. What is this? Cried Theron, looking at me, averting his eyes from the burning torch in my hand. What work of the underworld? What magic do you bring into our midst? What sorcery? How does a torch pass at night through the camp, carried by an unseen hand? Raphael went to him and laid his hand on his quaking back. Arise, Theron. This is no magic, no trick. I am a friend, come to help. He turned to Scarus. And you, brave Scarus, why do you shake? Get up, there is work to do. Protothesis and Scumaxa had come up to the pavilion, following the burning torch up the hill. Raphael drew his hood back. The dark clouds above parted, and a shaft of moonlight illuminated his face. He smiled, his face aglow with a quiet radiance. And you, royal brother princes, why do you wait here, staring at me dumbfounded? Arise yourselves. It is time to welcome your sister back into this world." With that, he turned and swiftly entered the darkened pavilion. I found him, the torch that he had passed to me illuminating the dark interior with a warm glow. The ashen-covered priestesses all rose in unison as we entered the chamber. Raphael raised his arms above his head. They fell to their knees and backed away, creeping into the corners and then out into the darkness, shrieking loudly as they ran down the hill, the cries echoing through the stillness like ripples on a pond. Arsalion, who had not yet left Axia's side, now stood and faced Raphael. He went to him and put both hands on his shoulders, speaking softly. "Courage, my son. Why do you sit here and weep? Your love awaits you. The world awaits you." Raphael turned to me. "Adam, long ago you found something in the mouth of a great fish. Do you have it here with you?" I passed the torch to Targetus. I reached inside my tunic to the place where the Chi-Rho medal hung around my neck. I undid the clasp and handed it to Raphael. It glistened and sparkled in the firelight. He looked deeply into my eyes. "Do not give this to me, but to her," he gestured towards the queen. I placed the medal on its chain around her neck, fastened it, and stood back. We all looked to her lying on her deathbed. As we watched, the color returned to her face. Her lips parted and she sighed, like someone awakening from a long sleep. Her eyes fluttered, her head moved, her eyes opened. She gasped and sat bolt upright. "Awake, daughter," said Raphael. "It is ordained that you shall leave this place of death. You shall follow the star, and it will light your way. Time is short, time to bury the dead and arrange your affairs. You too are called to greater things." Suddenly, a great breath of wind blew into the great hall, rustling all the hanging silks and draperies. The torch in Targetus's hand sputtered, the flames dancing ever brighter. The breeze subsided, leaving all of us looking at each other. Raphael was gone. Axia was on her feet, fully awake, as if nothing had happened to her. We were alone again, but everything had changed. Springtime came again, and it was time to go. I opened my eyes and now found myself sitting again on my sturdy step horse atop the Kurgan, the burial mound rising like a great hillock above the surrounding steppe. The sun had begun its climb across a brilliant blue sky. The surrounding grasslands were splashed with intense colors, deep red, magenta, purple, blues, and pristine whites, forming a floral carpet covering the plain. The spring blooms came during the short period of time after the winter thaw. This colorful sun-kissed carpet rolled right up to the entrance to the tomb, a large wedge-shaped cut in the side of the Kurgan, lined with blocks of stone. Beside me, to my left, was my still faithful friend and erstwhile betrayer Scarus. He finally looked comfortable seated on his horse, dressed in full armor, gleaming steel helmet crested with blue and white horsehair, and a blood-red military cloak wrapped around him. To my right was the Vasilisa, the tigress of the steppes, Axia, mounted on her splendid white stallion, with her new husband Arsalion, the Sarmatian prince of the Roxolani. Far to the west, close to the horizon, was that mysterious blue light which blazed forth as it had all the previous night. The full morning sunlight only slightly diminished its brilliance. This pillar of light throbbed like a blinding white-hot fire, sometimes like water, quicksilver and flowing, sometimes a swirling rush of flame, and then like waterfalls, soaring and flying like molten birds on wing, and then settling down into a shimmering brightness. A shadow passed between us and the rising sun, and a large raptor, swifter than lightning, flashed before us, turning and spiraling upward, borne up by a rising column of air. A piercing scream cut the quiet morning like a knife. Io, Io, Io! This was Zephyra announcing her presence, and I knew that her master, Targetus, he whose sight was far-seeing, was with us. Time to go, I said. Time is short, and we have a long way to travel. We turned our horses and made our way down the Kurgan. My thoughts turned to Sophia. Music for Chapter 25 from Ed Records, Legends, Save the World, A New Hope, Yellow Sky, A New Quest. From Epidemic Sound, Utakata by Seiyur Hayashi Egnal, Ophelia's Dream, Ethos by Johannes Bornloff, Mystic Mountain by John Bajork, Words of an Angel by Kikoru, Kyria Elensom by Silver Maple, Av Jord Till Jord by Silver Maple. From Twins Music, Brave. From Zach Nelson, Myth. The Archangel Chronicles, copyright 2023 by Raymond Collodi, all rights reserved.